In order to do teshuvah properly, do we have to specify all of the averos that we did, or is a generic, overarching sense of teshuvah good enough? It's an interesting debate at the end of the Talmud Yerushalmi on Yuma, and it teaches us some very important principles about how teshuvah works. So, there's a debate about the nature of the vidui that we have to say on Yom Kippur that is discussed at the end of Masechta Yuma in the Yerushalmi. What's the debate? Tani. According to the first opinion, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, when you make a vidui on Yom Kippur, you have to include all of the possible detail. And just to point out, according to the Gemara, the Talmud Bavli, it's actually Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. But we're going to speak Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira because we're going with the Yerushalmi. Whereas Rabbi Kiva says you do not have to get into the details of every single Aveira in order to do vidui on Yom Kippur. Then, the Yerushalmi then continues, and this is how it concludes the Gemara. The pasuk tells us that the Eibush is like a mikveh for the Jewish people. Ma ha-mikveh, metarias atmeim, just like a mikveh purifies those who are impure. So the Eibush also creates purity for us. Likewise, the pasuk says, I will sprinkle holy or pure waters over you, and it will purify you. From all of your various forms of impurity, Hashem says, I will purify you. And that's the end of the Masechta in Yerushalmi. We've got to ask the obvious question, which is, what's the link between these two subjects? What's the link between the debate whether or not you have to specify all the details of your averos in the vidui and the drasha which follows? And this whole discussion about how the Eibishter purifies us, what's the link between that? Why did the Gemara put the two of them together, the debate about the details of vidui, with the process or the principle that the Eibishter purifies us? So the easiest way you would answer is you would say, well, the Gemara is effectively using the same kind of reference that the Mishnah made at the end of the Mishnah. And the reason it's mentioned here is that the Gemara would end off on a positive note. Even if it's not directly linked to what was immediately beforehand. We've explained multiple times. Everything in Torah is absolutely precise. It would be much better to explain the fact that the Gemara here chose to end with this particular positive message. This particular message must be because the message of how the Eibishter purifies us is linked to the debate as to whether or not you have to specify the Averos in Vidui. Okay, before we get to what the link is, let's just examine how the Gemara ended off this conversation, because there are a number of questions there too. What the Gemara here tells us, that Hashem is like a mikveh to purify us, is actually what was already said in the Mishnah. Look how the Mishnah says it. Rabbi Kiva says, Yisrael, praiseworthy or happy are you, the Jewish people, in front of whom and who do you purify yourselves, and who purifies you? Your Father in heaven. Because the pasuk says, that I will sprinkle purifying waters on you. In addition to which it says mikveh Yisrael Hashem, that Hashem is like the mikveh for the Jewish people. Then the Mishnah unpacks that. Ma mikveh metarias hatmeim, just like a mikveh purifies those who are impure. Afakadosh Baruch Hu metarias Yisrael. Likewise, the Eibishter purifies the Jewish people. While it appears that the Mishnah and the Gemara are telling us identical things, there are actually two very significant differences between how the Mishnah says it and how the Gemara says it. The Mishnah first quoted the pasuk V'zorakti, and then the pasuk Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. The Gemara does the reverse. Number two, Beis Mishnah V'zorakti. In the Mishnah, it just said, "I will sprinkle purifying waters on you," etc. Whereas the Gemara quotes the entire pasuk. Why that distinction? On the very fact that the Gemara did use different language to what the Mishnah did, that illustrates to us that the Gemara is trying to illustrate something a little different to what the Mishnah is telling us, in which case we have to ask, what are in fact the two different objectives or messages of the Mishnah and of the Gemara? And just to add to that, must be logically that the reason the Gemara presents this particular concept of the Eibishter purifying us differently to how it is presented in the Mishnah is because the Gemara is presenting it straight after the debate about how you're supposed to say video, and obviously that is somehow linked. Okay, so let's have a look at the reasoning behind the two opinions as to whether or not you have to spell out all the details of your Averos in a video. To understand the basis for this difference of opinion, whether or not you have to enunciate or list all of your Averos, the Gemara there brings psukim to support the two views. The one who says that you have to give the details of your Aveira. There is learns it from the pasuk after the Egel Azov, where it says, that Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Eibishter, please, these people have done a terrible sin. What is the sin? He specifies. They made an Egel Azov. Rabbi Akiva Meishiv, to which Rabbi Akiva responds, you don't have to tell me that that's a reason you have to spell out your details of your Aveira. Because there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, that happy is the person who carries the Aveira and hides it. Well, even though you have these two psukim, they're not some kind of an irrational decree that the Torah makes. It makes sense, as we see in multiple other similar types of arguments, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira on the one hand, Rabbi Akiva interpret or align themselves with different psukim because they have different approaches to how teshuvah is supposed to work, and we need to understand what those different approaches are. So Tosfos is going to give us a clue. Tosfos using a Yerushalmi elsewhere helps to understand, to explain to us the debate over here. That what's the psychology behind encouraging people to actually spell out all of the details of their Avera? Because it's going to make a person very self-conscious and embarrassed. And that's going to cause a person to be embarrassed of what they have done wrong, and that will stimulate them to do a much more profound kind of teshuvah because they'll be feeling bad. Whereas the opinion Rabbi Akiva, who says that you shouldn't spell out all of the details, that's that the person should not establish for themselves a bad reputation where in future people suspect, well, we've heard that you did Averis in the past, maybe you're doing Averis again now. So let's understand what are the rationales behind these two opinions. What do we focus on? That it's more important for the person to feel their personal shame, or that it's more important to protect the person from being held in disregard in the future. The value of feeling embarrassed about the Aveira that a person did would be a value in the time of doing teshuvah. When a person feels terribly embarrassed about the misbehavior that they had engaged in, that's going to create a much more profound sense of remorse over what happened in the past, which will lead to a far deeper commitment to doing things better in the future. So their current experience of teshuvah will be a more heightened experience of teshuvah. Whereas the concern about people looking at you in a bad light, and in the future people shouldn't expect that maybe you've done other averos. That's not something that's relevant at the time the person is doing teshuvah. This is relevant to the reputation that they will have in the future. That they'll become less trustworthy in the future, etc. In fact, you could even say, if people are going to suspect that this person has certain bad behaviors, maybe they'll embarrass him with those bad behaviors in the future, and maybe they'll mistreat him in the future. Which is quite similar to the prohibition that we have against reminding somebody of their bad past. So this is a little different because it's not the bad past, it's rather the fact that people are going to suspect that the individual still behaves in a bad way. But the bottom line is, are we looking at the situation now, where the benefit to teshuvah now is that sense of embarrassment, or are we concerned about what's going to happen in the future, where this person may be seen in a bad light? Which takes us to a core question that is discussed in multiple places in Torah, which is, do we determine the reality of the current situation based on a concern about what may happen in the future situation? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you need to spell out all the details of your averas. He holds, well, the value of that is going to benefit the teshuvah in the now, so it will be deeper and more genuine, So let's not worry about what's going to happen in the future. Let's focus on now, get the person to do the best form of teshuvah now, and that's what counts. Whereas Rabbi Akiva's view is, as the Rebbe has explained, specifically in the context of how Rabbi Akiva looked at the Churban and saw within it the potential for the future. That you live now with a view to the future. Even Rabbi Akiva's famous concept of Kol Mada Ovid Achmana Letav Ovid. Right now, I don't see that it's good, but it will be good in the future, and that's going to determine how I experience things now. Rabbi Akiva's perspective was always in the current event to see how things were going to pan out in the future and determine the current reality based on that future. Rabbi Akiva argues, yes, I agree with you, that right now saying all of the detail of the various would promote a greater teshuvah, but I'm concerned about what's going to happen in the future, and I believe that the future has a determining influence on what goes on now. So, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira focuses on the now. Rabbi Akiva looks at how things are going to pan out in the future. Now, if that is Rabbi Akiva's view, there is a practical difference in what it means to spell out our averos. Because then you could say Rabbi Akiva's reticence against a person enunciating all of the details of the Averis is, if it's going to be loud enough for other people to hear, because if other people do hear, then maybe in the future they'll think, oh, this person has bad track record, and maybe we don't trust them. But if that is the logic, then Rabbi Akiva would agree that if I'm saying it quietly to myself and nobody else is going to know the details of the Avera that I did, but it's going to stimulate a deeper teshuvah, good idea. That's what you would think. But Rabbi Akiva didn't make that kind of a distinction. He seemed to make a blanket rule, which is don't share the details of your Averis in your vidui. That implies that he believes across the board it's not a good idea. Why would that be? Therefore, we need a deeper perspective of what it means when Rabbi Akiva says that the future will determine the reality we're supposed to focus on now. But teshuvah yesh kama madregas, we all know that teshuvah is a multi-layered experience. But broadly, you could divide teshuvah into two different categories, as the Gemara does. Teshuvah me'ira, there's teshuvah that is motivated by a sense of fear of losing the connection to Hashem, fear of consequences, and teshuvah me'ahava, teshuvah that is stimulated by a tremendous love of Hashem, and therefore I want to reclaim the closeness that I have to Hashem. So perhaps this same debate, whether or not it is appropriate to spell out the details of our Averas, will depend on which kind of teshuvah we're talking about. If the motivating factor for a person doing teshuvah is because they stand in fear, then it would make a lot of sense. Well, if we're trying to stimulate a sense of fear of the distance or disconnect from Hashem, then you should get into the details. Because the driving force for this person doing teshuvah is because they're afraid, because they want to escape some kind of a negative consequence, or they're afraid that they're losing schar and they want to reclaim that schar. Then of course it's relevant to know what kind of an avera am I dealing with? How serious was it? How pervasive was it? Because no two averas are the same. That if I am concerned about consequence, well then obviously I have a different concern for an avera that is serious and has major consequences versus an avera which is minor and has lesser consequence. And that's why I have to get into this level of detail, because if I don't engage the detail, I won't have the fear that I'm supposed to have, because I won't feel the gravity of the particular avera that I did, and I'm not going to therefore express appropriate remorse. Whereas if what motivates my teshuvah is a love of Hashem, and therefore the person is not fixated on what could happen to me and how I could be harmed. All that I care about is that I love the Eibishter and I want to have a relationship with the Eibishter. So therefore the detail of what went wrong isn't that important, because there is one theme that is equal to every avera, no matter how severe or how light it is. They call avera for the kala shebekala, every single avera, even the least significant, creates a barrier between our relationship, and I love Hashem. I don't want an obstacle in our relationship. That's why I don't have to give the details, because the details are not going to deepen the experience of the teshuvah that I'm doing. And that will give us a better insight into appreciating the debate between Rabbi ben Beseira and Rabbi Akiva. We've explained elsewhere in great detail, no matter which kind of teshuvah a person is doing, there is a core theme that runs through all of teshuvah. Even if a person is doing the most rudimentary, primitive teshuvah, it is still teshuvah, which, as the name indicates, is it is a return to the Eibishter. That is a common theme right throughout every form of teshuvah. If a person is doing teshuvah out of a sense of love of Hashem, then you can see clearly that the teshuvah is about recreating the relationship with Hashem, to be close and connected to Hashem. That is obvious. So that's the theme in every form of teshuvah, but when the teshuvah is motivated by ahava, I can see the theme. Whereas when a person is motivated to teshuvah because they want to avoid consequences, then the person's teshuvah is basically saying that Yetzer Hara has obscured my perspective and enticed me into doing things that I shouldn't do, and I need to neutralize that Yetzer Hara. Even though the teshuvah looks like the activity is to neutralize the Yetzer Hara, it's still in its deepest sense, its core reality, it's returning my neshama to reconnect with Hashem. Therefore, knowing that every level of teshuvah, if you break it down and distill it to its core elements, is all about connecting to Hashem. So the shittas Rabbi Akiva, if you go with Rabbi Akiva's perspective, which is how things will be, determines how I should look at them now. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva looks at teshuvah, no matter what kind of teshuvah it is, and he is able to see the depth of teshuvah, which may only come to light in the future. So in the teshuvah that the person is doing now, regardless of what is motivating them to do that teshuvah, Rabbi Akiva sees that is fundamentally returning to Hashem. Despite the fact that the individual is still at a very superficial dimension of teshuvah, motivated by wanting to stay out of trouble. Rabbi Akiva is able to identify that deep within that teshuvah, at least potentially, is teshuvah that is motivated by love. And that kind of teshuvah which is motivated by love does not get caught up in the details of what did I do and what is the problem because of it. And therefore Rabbi Akiva says, I don't have to express all the detail, because detail is only relevant when I'm looking to motivate myself to do teshuvah me'ira. But because bepnimi is the deeper reality of every teshuvah, is that it's motivated by love of Hashem, and love of Hashem, it doesn't matter what I did, it's the fact that I ruined the relationship that counts. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva says you don't have to get into the details of the Avera in order to motivate the teshuvah. And once we understand that perspective about Rabbi Akiva's rationale, knowing that the reason Rabbi Akiva says you don't have to specify the details of the Avera is because of Rabbi Akiva's perspective, where you can see the future already in the present, that will explain something else on this topic which the Rambam brings, and as we'll see, the Kesef Mishnah addresses what the Rambam says. Because Rambam posek v'tzorich lifrot asachet deloy Rabbi Akiva. Very interestingly, according to the Rambam, when you want to do teshuvah and you're doing vidoy, you have to be very specific in the vidoy. That's a surprise. Why is the Rambam not paskening like Rabbi Akiva, which is what you're meant to do when there's a one-on-one debate between Rabbi Akiva and another sage? So the Mefarshim on the Rambam asked the question, why does the Rambam not paskin like Rabbi Akiva? The general principle is when it's Rabbi Akiva arguing with another individual sage, we follow Rabbi Akiva la'alacha. Why is the Rambam not doing that here? So the Kesef Mishnah answers, the Kevin should be Gemara Bebavli, Huva Meimed de Rabbi Yehuda Rav. Because if you have a look, we've been quoting the Talmud Yerushalmi, but if you have a look in the Talmud Bavli, it quotes Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav. See if the pasuk says, One pasuk tells us it's ideal to keep your averos quiet, implying that you should not spell out the details of your avera in vidoy. But there's also a pasuk in Mishlei that says that if a person completely hides their averos, in other words, does not speak about them, does not list the details of the avera, then he won't be successful in doing teshuvah. So those two psukim seem to contradict each other. One says don't express the detail, and one says do. Says the Gemara, lo kashya. The Gemara says it's no debate. If the avera is public, then you should speak about it in detail. If nobody else knows about the avera, keep it to yourself. Now, the Gemara here, in the name of Rav, is quoting something that only goes with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who is of the view that there's a value in speaking the details of the avera in the vidoy. Whereas Rabbi Akiva is across the board of the view that you don't specify the details of your avera, even if the avera is well known. Says the Kesef Mishnah. Who was the author of that statement in the Gemara? Rav. Rav is firstly a Basroi, in other words, he's after the Mishnah, and is Rav Tano Polig. He has a lot of authority, and therefore if Rav tells us that there is room to specify the details of an Avera, that implies that in spite of our general rule that you follow Rabbi Akiva, in this particular case you don't, and that's why the Rambam Paskin that you actually have to spell out the details of your Avera in saying the Vidoy. Now that implies something very interesting. Seeing as that was the Talmud Bavli. But the Talmud Yerushalmi does not quote this particular conversation from Rav. Therefore, the Yerushalmi obviously holds halacha Rabbi Akiva, the halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveroi. The Yerushalmi obviously holds that the halacha does follow Rabbi Akiva, and you should not or do not have the requirement to get into the details of all your averas, because that's normally what we do. We follow Rabbi Akiva. That implies now that not only is there a debate here between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, but there appears to be a similar debate between the Talmud Bavli and Yerushalmi. And once we understand that Rabbi Akiva is the one who's saying the future determines the reality of the present, whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says the present has to be taken into consideration as the primary construct, so we'll see that similar things define the debate between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and this is El Shitasam of the Bavli and Yerushalmi. Now we can appreciate why there is a debate between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, whether you follow the halacha Rabbi Akiva or not. Because we've already explained multiple times that generally speaking the approach of Talmud Bavli is look at how things are currently, and that is the determining factor. Whereas the Yerushalmi speaks more the language of Rabbi Akiva, that even when considering how to determine something now, you have to take into consideration things that relate to the future. And the reason for these different approaches is because the Bavli and Yerushalmi have two completely different approaches to how to learn Torah. Talmud Bavli nikra b'mechashakim. The pasuk tells of mechashakim hashivani Hashem, that the Eibishter, so to speak, placed me in the dark, and the Gemara says this refers to Talmud Bavli. Because the nature of how you learn in Talmud Bavli is like a person fumbling in the dark. Which we know from our experience of learning Gemara Talmud Bavli is that in order to get to some kind of conclusion, you have to find your way through, and finding your way includes many debates and many questions, most of which obscure the information and certainly the conclusion that you're supposed to arrive at. Whereas learning Talmud Yerushalmi is like living in an illuminated environment. You can see exactly where you're supposed to go. There's not a lot of debate, and you can very quickly arrive at the conclusion, the correct conclusion. Therefore, when you're learning with a Shittas HaBavli, which is, I don't see my way clear, I can't see further than my nose, so I have to therefore consider how things are now. Because at this point, what's going to be in the future? I don't know. It's hidden, it's mysterious, and I cannot see it in the present situation. Whereas in the Talmud Yerushalmi, where everything is illuminated, even as I'm standing here, I can see what's down there. I can see the future. And therefore, that future, that horizon that I can see, influences how things are supposed to be conducted now. But which speaks directly to our topic. The Shittas HaBavli seeing as the Gemara Bavlis always looks from the perspective of the here and now. Then you go to Rabbi Baba who says you look at the now. What's the now? The most important thing is to elaborate on all of the details of the Avera in order to have the most powerful kind of teshuvah. So the halacha follows him. Whereas the Yerushalmi is always looking ahead and saying, let's consider things that lie in the future to determine how we should do things now. You go with Rabbi Akiva, who sees the trouble that could come in the future from spelling out the Avera, plus that he sees within every teshuvah, he already sees the primus of teshuvah, which is teshuvah me'ava, and teshuvah me'ava doesn't need the details. So the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. That will also help us to understand the nature of how the Gemara Yerushalmis concludes Masechta Yuma with those variations from the Mishnah. First it says that the Eibush is like a mikveh, and then it says that the Eibush will sprinkle waters to purify us, and concludes the pasuk Atari Eschem, I will purify you. We can see the link between that conversation and this debate that we've just unpacked. Both psukim seem to be giving us the same message, that the Eibishter helps us to purify ourselves through teshuvah. So what's the distinction between the two psukim? We'll be able to explain based on how quite a number of the Mefarshim explain these two psukim. You can hear that there is the Eibishter speaking, saying, I will spray the water on you. That represents the Eibishter helping us to be awoken to do teshuvah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'ir limani teshuvah. That Eibishter wakes up our hearts to be sensitized to do teshuvah. Or mikveh Yisrael Hashem, whereas the immersion in Hashem's mikveh, me'ir ala teshuvah sha'iseh ha'adam, that insinuates us putting in the effort to do teshuvah on our own. K'shem shebetar b'mikveh yova b'mayim ha'adam ha'idach litfol b'mikveh, and that is the symbolism of immersing in a mikveh, where the person who is impure has to go to the mikveh and do the act of immersing in the mikveh, implying we have to do the act of doing teshuvah. That will explain why the Mishnah orders these psukim one way, and as we'll see in a moment, the Gemara a different way. What does the Mishnah say? First, it quotes the pasuk that Hashem is going to sprinkle holy waters or pure waters on us. And then it describes how the Eibush is going to be our mikveh, because that's actually the chronology of teshuvah. Until a person does teshuvah, the person is distant from Hashem. And it's this kind of person that the pasuk refers to when it says that your averos become a barrier between you and Hashem. Vazai. If the person is so distant from Hashem, in their circumstances, it's going to be really difficult for the person to arouse and awaken themselves to do teshuvah because they are feeling desensitized. Therefore, the way the Eibusha does it is, first the Eibusha gives us a little shokol, gives us a little bit of a wake-up call, and he sprinkles this pure water on us. Which means that the Eibusha stimulates within us thoughts that perhaps we should be doing teshuvah. But that's not where it ends. There's obviously no value in the person remaining at a kind of teshuvah which is on life support, because the Eibush just stimulated the teshuvah. Rather, what's supposed to happen is this should be a catalyst to stimulate the person to invest now their own efforts to be able to do teshuvah on their own. That's why the Mishnah then continues. He talks about a mikveh of purification that the Eibusha provides for us, and as mentioned, the mikveh, you've got to go to the mikveh. The mikveh is not coming to you. You've got to immerse in the mikveh, implying that the person has to also, after they've been inspired by the Eibusha, they have to put in their own effort. Which also explains that when the Mishnah quotes that pasuk, it only quotes that the Eibusha says, I will sprinkle this pure water on you, without the words that say, and you will be purified. Why? Because this pasuk is just emphasizing the fact that the Eibusha will stimulate us. But not so much about the fact, and we will purify ourselves, because we also have to do something in order for that to happen. Because utaharta means that you will become pure. And the Mishnah is of the view that is really expressed more in the second pasuk, which says there's a mikveh and you've got to go immersed in the mikveh. In other words, you've got to do your work. That's the approach that the Mishnah takes. The Gemara takes a different approach. Now we appreciate, as we already mentioned in the beginning, that the fact that the Gemara reverses the order of the psukim, when it quotes them, it's because it's giving us a completely different message. The Mishnah was talking about the vazorakti, the divine inspiration that occurs before and as a cause of people doing teshuvah. Whereas in the Gemara, where it first tells us the pasuk mikveh Yisrael Hashem, and then the pasuk v'zarakti, which means after the person has invested their effort in doing teshuvah, they've already been to the metaphorical mikveh. Well, then the v'zarakti must then also be part of what the person achieves through their teshuvah. Which is why the entire pasuk is quoted. Including the word utaharta, which is a word representing human endeavor. In fact, the Gemara is arguing that the teshuvah of Zarakti Aleichem is an even more advanced experience of personal teshuvah than mikveh Yisrael, which is why it is quoted in the Gemara after the words mikveh Yisrael. Why is that? There are two kinds of purification described here, one by immersion in a mikveh and one by having the pure water sprinkled on us. In order to have that purification through Vazorakti, it's got to be Maim Chaim, water that comes from living waters, in other words, a river that never dries up. Which is the ultimate form of purification, so powerful that it could even purify a person who's been contaminated by a dead body. That's what the Gemara is alluding to. After a person has done everything in their personal power in order to do teshuvah, which is the kind of teshuvah we represent by immersion in a mikveh. Then the Eibishter pushes that person upwards to be able to achieve the highest form of teshuvah, which is the kind of teshuvah represented by the Mayim Chaim that can even purify contamination of death. Which now helps us to understand why this, the conclusion of the Gemara, is directly preceded by the debate as to how we go about saying vidoy. First, the Gemara quotes the debate whether or not you have to spell out all of your averos. This first Rabbi Kiva Bazei Kanal Sif Dalit Shebechol Tshuva, Gam Beifen Atachtem B'Yosef, where Rabbi Kiva's shita is you do not have to. Why? Because no matter what kind of tshuva you are doing, even the most superficial tshuva, deep within that is the potential for the highest form of tshuva. Tshuva mi ahava. Tshuva, which is motivated by love of Hashem, when you have that kind of tshuva, you don't have to spell out all of the details of your averos. To clarify this for us, the Gemara quotes the pasuk mikveh Yisrael Hashem, and then it gives us the second pasuk of Zarakti Aleichem with all of the details, because it tells us the same story. That all a person has to do is start the teshuvah, go to the mikveh. And that will lead, as Rabbi Akiva could see, the future of that teshuvah is that it will come to the highest level of teshuvah, which is vazorakti, where a person has teshuvah mi'ah, the ultimate level of reconnection to the Eibishter. Because Rabbi Akiva is able to identify that at their core, every kind of teshuvah is the same principle and the same process, namely, loshuv ad Hashem, to connect to Hashem. We should all be zeicher to be able to do teshuvah mi'ahava, and la'al teshuvah, la'al gula, to bring Mashiach now.